There is something uniquely charming about bad racing games. Not the kind that are just forgettable, I mean the truly special kind. The games that try, fail, and somehow still leave behind a weird sense of fascination. The kind where every design decision feels just slightly off, like it was made by someone who's seen racing games, but never actually played one. Welcome to the Worst Racing Games, the internet series where you guys suggest different racing games that you think are terrible, and then I play them, review them, and rank them. So last week we had the absolutely horrible GT Racers, and once again we have another budget PS2 game this week, so thank you Worst Racing Games wheel. This is classic British motor racing on the PS2. Released in February of 2006, developed by Data Design Interactive, a studio very infamous for pumping out low-budget titles at a frankly alarming rate. This is one of those games that instantly raises questions the moment you hear about it, because on paper, this one actually doesn't sound terrible. Licensed British cars, a focus on classic vehicles, a few different modes, weather effects, even kind of a tutorial, or at least an explanation. But then you remember who made it. Yes, the same developers behind two of my least favourite games we've covered in this series, Action Girls Racing, and London Taxi Rush Hour. A studio whose reputation, if we're being honest, is built almost entirely on producing some of the most questionable gaming experiences ever put to disc. So the question is, did they finally get one kinda right, or is this just another entry in the Data Design Hall of Shame? Let's find out. Classic British Motor Racing launched on PS2 in 2006, published in Europe by Metro 3D. A couple of years later, it got a Wii release in 2008, which if you know anything about shovelware on the Wii, probably tells you everything you may need to know. This was a time when the PS2 was absolutely flooded with racing games. So for a smaller developer like Data Design Interactive, standing out was, well, kinda difficult to be fair, and their solution, more often than not, wasn't to innovate, it was to just mass produce. They made a lot of games, and most of them were very cheap, most of them were very rushed, and most of them were frankly not very good. But every now and then you'd get something that looked like they were at least trying, and I'm happy to say that classic British motor racing feels like one of those attempts. So let's boot it up, and immediately, yeah, this is a Data Design Interactive game. The menus are exactly what you'd expect, simple, flat, and incredibly cheap. There's no flair, no style, no real sense of identity. It's functional, and that's probably about the nicest thing I can possibly say about it. But here's the thing, at least it does function. Everything is laid out clearly enough, you can navigate without confusion, there's no weird design quirks getting in your way, and surprisingly there's kind of a tutorial. It's like a proper explanation of how the game works, what the modes are, and what you're supposed to be doing. And that might sound like the bare minimum, because like, it kind of is, but for this developer it actually feels like a step up. It gives the impression, at least initially, that maybe a little more effort went into this one. Not a lot, but more than usual. Now if you've played any other Data Design game, you will probably recognise the menu layout because they literally just cut and paste it from game to game and change the background picture. It is quite lazy. In terms of content, the game offers three main modes: single race, championship, and time trials. Single race is exactly what you'd expect. Pick a track, pick a car, go racing. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. Championship mode is where most of the structure lies. There are three different tiers, that's bronze, silver, and gold, each consisting of 4 races. Progress through them, earn points, standard stuff really. And then there's the time trials, which is where things actually get a bit strange. Before you can use any of the 13 cars in the game, you have to complete a time trial with each one. They call it qualifying, but it doesn't actually determine your starting position in any races, which is kind of weird. It's essentially just a gatekeeping mechanic to stretch the game out. The good news is you don't have to do anything particularly challenging. There's no strict requirement for performance, you just complete a lap and the car is unlocked. And because you can choose any track, just pick the shortest one and breeze through the entire roster in a quick time. It's not a terrible system, it's just a kind of pointless one. Like a lot of things in this game, it feels like an idea that was implemented without really thinking through why it actually exists. Now before we talk about the actual racing, if you're a fan of retro games, racing games, or in this case, kind of bad racing games, if you haven't done so already, please consider hitting that subscribe button and tapping the bell to stay up to date with my future uploads. And if you'd like to support this series and channel any further, and want access to some cool goodies like early access to videos and your name in the credits of uploads, then please consider checking out my Patreon using the link in the description below. Anyway, let's get into the actual racing, because really this is where things start to fall apart. The first thing you'll notice is the handling, and honestly it's very weird. All the cars feel very similar, which isn't ideal in a game that's supposedly celebrating classic British vehicles. You'd expect maybe some variation from the Mini to the Austin Healey, different weights, different handling characteristics, something at least to make each car feel unique, but instead everything just feels kind of floaty, like the cars aren't properly connected to the road. There's a lack of weight, a lack of responsiveness, and it makes precise control very difficult, especially when you're trying to take corners at speed. And that's before you factor in the performance issues, because yes, the frame rate does drop. Not constantly, but it's definitely enough to be noticeable, especially when multiple cars are on screen and colliding with each other. And when your handling already feels loose and imprecise, those dips make things even harder to manage. It creates this strange disconnect where you're never quite confident in what the car is going to do. Then we have the AI, and if you've played literally any data design interactive game before, you already know what to expect here. They are not good. In fact, calling them AI might be giving them too much credit. They're slow, they're inconsistent, and most importantly, as per usual, they're incredibly stupid. They'll crash into walls for no reason, they'll collide with each other or you constantly. Sometimes they'll just veer off as if they've completely forgotten what a racing line even is. And the best part, it doesn't really matter what difficulty you choose because they're just bad across the board, which completely kills any sense of challenge. You're not racing against competent opponents, you're basically just navigating around a bunch of moving obstacles, and once you're past them, just setting faster lap times. And even those obstacles aren't particularly threatening. Visually, the game is, well, a mixed bag. Let's start with the positives. The cars themselves are licensed, featuring brands like MG, Austin, and Triumph, and that's actually a decent touch and it gives the game a bit of authenticity. Model-wise, they're fine, I guess. They're not really great. They're not the worst I've ever seen. They're just kind of passable, which again is better than what I expected from this developer. But then you look at the environments and that's where things start to feel even worse. There are 4 countryside tracks and they all look basically the same. Dull colours, minimal detail, very little variation. It's the kind of environment where nothing really stands out, and after a couple of races, or even laps, everything just blends together. It's not offensive, just really boring. However, the London tracks were a bit of a surprise. There are 2 city-based circuits and they actually look okay. Still not great, but noticeably better than the countryside tracks. Which is particularly ironic when you remember that this is the same devs that made London Taxi Rush Hour, and somehow they've managed to depict London better here in 2 small tracks than in an entire game dedicated to London. It's not saying much, but it's something. Interestingly, the game also includes weather effects, specifically rain and lightning. Rain looks okay, it adds a bit of atmosphere even if it doesn't actually affect the handling whatsoever, which, feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. But then there's the lightning, and yeah, I'm just going to give a quick warning about flashing lights, so if you want to skip that part, go to the time shown on screen now. So yeah, instead of subtle flashes in the distance, you get these rapid full-screen white flashes that completely overpower the visual. It's jarring, it's distracting, and if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, it could genuinely be a massive problem. It's one of those features that probably sounded good in theory, but wasn't executed well at all. So moving on to the sound design, the game features 3 licensed tracks from an 80s band called Extraordinary Through the Bullet, which is a band I've never heard of before playing this game, and to be honest I don't think many people have because, having done some research, I couldn't really find very much. But the songs themselves are fine, I guess. They're perfectly listenable. The problem is there's just 3 of them, so after a few races you really start to notice the repetition. And after a few more, it becomes impossible to ignore. There's just not enough variety to keep things interesting. As for the engine and car sounds, they're about as generic as you'd expect. There's no real character or distinctiveness, just standard placeholder sounding audio. Again, not the worst we've ever heard, it's just incredibly uninspired. And that kind of sums up the entire experience. Nothing here is completely broken, nothing is outrageously offensive, but almost everything about it feels underdeveloped. It's like a game that was built to meet the bare minimum requirements of being a racing game, and then shipped, which does kind of sum up data design perfectly. There are hints of effort, a kind of tutorial, licensed cars, some okay visuals in certain parts of the game, but none of it comes together in any kind of a meaningful way. And of course, because of that, unsurprisingly, the critical reception to this game was not good. Across all versions, the game reviewed poorly. One of the more notable reviews that I came across was from Games Radar, which gave the PS2 version a 1 out of 5. And honestly, that feels about right. Their summary of pros and cons is particularly telling, highlighting just how little this game does to stand out in an already crowded genre. And as for the sales figures, well, there aren't really any to go off of, and that usually tells its own story. This isn't a game that made a big impact, it wasn't a hidden gem, it was just there for a very brief moment, and then it wasn't. So now the time has come to rank classic British motor racing on our worst racing games tier list. Now, in all fairness, this is probably the best data design interactive game that I've played in this series, but saying that is like saying I have a favourite Lego brick to stand on barefoot in the night. The game is not good, do not get me wrong. It's nice to see some of these older licensed cars, but outside of that, there's not really anything else that I can say positive about this game. So instead of joining all the other data design games down in pure evil, I think classic British motor racing belongs in hot garbage. It is slightly better than the other games that these guys have pumped out, but it is still absolutely terrible, but at least it does have some redemption. So is it worth playing at all? Probably not. Even by the standards of budget PS2 racing games, it doesn't really offer much of a reason to come back. Inconsistent handling, terrible AI, and just very boring presentation. But at the same time, as I say, it's not the worst thing these guys have ever made, and that might be the weirdest takeaway of all, because in a strange way, this feels like a glimpse of what they could have done if they'd put in a bit more time, budget, care, and polish. It's not good, but it's definitely not completely hopeless either. It just sits in this awkward middle ground where you can see some potential, but also exactly why it never came close to meeting that potential. And honestly, that might be more interesting than if it had just been another outright disaster from the same team. And so that takes us to the end of our look at classic British motor racing, and with it, this week's episode of Worst Racing Games. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of this game? Have you played it? Are you gonna play it? And would you rank it any differently? And if you have any suggestions for the series, as always, pop them down below as well. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thank you and goodbye.